In this lesson, we're going to cover how to place in existing parts and assemblies into an assembly, and we'll also cover how to create a brand new part or an assembly in the context of an assembly. So in this case, I'm going to start off. I'm going to just create a brand new assembly file. And in this case, we're going to start off by placing existing parts inside this assembly. So you notice it's assembly 2, entirely blank. And I'm going to click on the Place Component tool, or the shortcut is the letter P. And when you do that, the files in this case are going to appear for the active project. And the files that I'm looking for are going to be in the Chapter 6 file folder. So in this case, I have a few different parts that already exist. So I'm going to click on this GenevaBase.ipt. I can now either double click on it or click on Open. And when I go ahead and do that, you'll notice that it's placing in one occurrence of that part. You can see that in the browser, it's base:1. If I place another point, click another point, I now have occurrence 2 and occurrence 3. If I go ahead and click Done, what's interesting to note here is that even though it says base 1, 2, and 3, all three of these are identical parts. So if I go ahead and I open up that part, any change that I make will be reflected on all the parts. So in this case, if I went back and filleted, let's just move that dialog box over a couple of these edges. And I'm going to make it a little bit larger so we can see it. Go ahead and click OK. If I go ahead and go back to the assembly, you'll notice that that change has occurred on all three occurrences because they all refer back to the exact same part. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those just by clicking on them and then press delete on the keyboard, or you can right click and then select on delete, or I could have held down the control key or did window crossing to select them. I'm also going to go back here. Let's click on Place Component again. So not only can we place in individual parts, but I can place in an existing assembly file. So I'm just going to go ahead and place in this motion assembly. And again, I could place in multiples of those if I wanted to. Right click Done, and you'll notice inside the browser I have my existing part that I placed back in there, the base part, and then you'll notice I have motion :1 and :2. In this case, you'll see that there's 3 blocks representing that. In this case, it's showing me that that's the assembly, and by expanding that, you can see that I now have 3 individual components that are nested inside there. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and delete out motion 2 because I don't need that, just like we did before. So that's all there really is to placing in components into an assembly file that already exist. The next portion in this lesson we're going to cover is creating a brand new component. So if I go ahead and click on Create New Component, or N for the shortcut key, in the dialog box, we can go back and designate a name. We can designate the template file. So if I select on that, you'll see that we can go back and we can place in a sheet metal part, a standard assembly file, a standard part, or a weldment. And these are going to be coming from the default location. So again, if it was installed with millimeters, it would be based on millimeters. If you installed Inventor with the inch unit, those would be based on inch. If you want to select from a different template file, click on the Browse Templates icon, and from here go back and select the specific tab that you want to place from or base this on. In this case, we'll just do a standard inch.ipt file, and then where do we want that file to get placed. So I can navigate back out. In this case, it's taking the default Chapter 6, so that's okay. And then I could go back and give it a new name. In this case, I'll just call it Test. We can also go back and designate the structure that this part is going to be based on, and you see that we have a few different options here, and these options we'll cover in a later lesson on bill of materials. We can also create a virtual component. A virtual component is a component that will not be modeled. For example, if I needed to go back and place in oil into a given machine here, I wouldn't necessarily go back and model oil, but I could create it as a virtual component where it would be created or placed in my bill of material, but I would never have to model that. The next option here is constrain the sketch plane. So in this case, I'm going to create a part file. Go ahead and click OK. And the icon, you see that it's being represented. It has the 3 squares around it. And basically what this is looking for is what plane do I want to place this part on. So I'm just going to select on the top face of that plane. And now I'm going to do the exact same steps that I would if I were just creating a brand new part file in its own environment. So in this case, I can create a circle. If we scroll on down here, place a dimension on that, give it a new value. We could extrude it, revolve it, whatever we need to do. Go ahead and place in other features, fillets, holes, chamfers, whatever we need it to do. Then click on the return tool. You'll see that it will take us back to the top level assembly. Now at this point, I can grab this component and I can move it around. In a later lesson, we'll talk about applying assembly constraints to lock that component into place. If I create a brand new component that's going to be based on an assembly file, as shown here, I'll just take the default. Go ahead and click OK. Select a plane to start it on. You'll notice in this case that I have the assembly just happens to be a weldment in this case. Now I have the exact same scenarios here that I can do. I can go back and I can place in a couple components. So if I were to do a weldment, I could place in maybe this base component. Maybe I needed to have a couple of these inside this assembly. And maybe I want to create a brand new component. So in this case, I'll just do a standard.ipt part file. And selecting the location, I'm just going to draw in a rectangle. I could dimension that. I'm just going to hit E for extrude. And let's have it go up 100 millimeters. Click OK. So what I want to point out here with this subassembly, you'll notice right now I'm at the part level. If I click on the return tool, at this point it's going to take me up one level at a time. And if I scroll up a little bit further, you'll see that I'm still inside this assembly 3. Click return. Now I'm just going to pan the screen over. As I move this, you'll see the components that I placed that are all inside of assembly 3. They all move as though they were a single component.